I thought we would learn by now. I really thought we would, but it's okay, I'm here to help. The Blackmagic ATEM switchers aren't perfect, but a large majority of so-called issues that people discuss online are more about user error and less about the actual switcher being a problem. Let's fix it. Problem number 1. I plugged my ATEM HDMI output into a monitor or a projector, and it looks weird or doesn't show up at all. There's a lot of reasons why this could be happening, but let's start with a few of the most common fixes I've seen. Before I give an answer, it's also important to mention that if you post this in a social media group like the Facebook groups for ATEM users, or somewhere for people to provide help, but you don't provide any information about what type of monitor you're using, the length of cable being used, or anything that might actually be important for troubleshooting it, you probably won't get a good answer. Let's start with the monitor. Computer monitors are made for computer frame rates. Video production monitors are made for video production frame rates. No two monitors are made alike, and when it comes to outputting a video signal like your multi-view from an ATEM, you should always aim to use a production monitor that is compatible with all frame rates. The ATEM can output a wide variety like 24 frames, 30 frames, or even 60 frames. If you're using a computer monitor, this could be the exact reason why it's not working. You can try to cycle between the frame rates in the ATEM software to see if one is more compatible than the other, but you shouldn't have to change the frame rate of your live stream just to get things to show up on the monitor. I use production monitors from CTEK because they have both HDMI and SDI inputs, but they're made to be compatible with common video production frame rates. Another possible consideration is the HDMI cable you're using from the ATEM to your monitor, or projector for that matter. If the cable is longer than 20 feet or so, there's a good chance the signal doesn't have enough juice to make it through the other side without the cable being a fiber optic cable or having some built-in signal booster. If you're using fiber optic HDMI cables, you may also need to check that you're using the right end since they're one directional. Typically the ends will say source and display, so you know where the signal needs to start and where it should end, or display. The last thing to check is whether or not the HDMI port on the cable is damaged. You can swap out the cable for a different one, I recommend a different length and manufacturer altogether, or grab a visual inspection to see if anything looks bent or damaged. Side note, if you're using converters like HDMI to Cat6 or something else in between, take the converter out and see if the signal still works to determine if it's the converter or something else. My favorite converter is the Decimator MDHX because it has a scaler built in and I can scale my signal to any other frame rate. Alternatively, there are down-up converters that Blackmagic has, and a company called Lumentech also makes scaling converters too, with a nice built-in LCD monitor to check the video signal. Problem number 2. I started to stream and pressed on air, it's just blinking, and the cache filled up to 100%. This is one where I will say yes, sometimes the ATEM encoder struggles, but it's more often than not because of a limitation on the network. First things first, let's make sure that the Ethernet cable is actually plugged into the ATEM. I know it sounds silly, but we go through the motions so much, and these things come second nature to the point where it's easy to screw things up. Just double check your work. From there, you want to connect a laptop to the Ethernet cable and make sure you're actually getting an internet signal. If not, the cable could be damaged, the port could be dead, or the network is blocking it, and you need to reach out to the IT administrator for the venue. If the laptop gets internet, then it's time to dig further and conduct a speed test. Head on over to speedtest.net to run a test and find out what your upload speed is. I try to make sure that I'm getting a bare minimum of 15 to 20 megabits per second, and if I'm not, I'll lower the ATEM streaming bitrate in the ATEM software control settings to streaming low. If this is still an ongoing issue, make sure that you're using the right stream key, because if the signal doesn't hit the destination, then the cache will also fill up. Problem number 3. I have a video feed plugged into camera input 1, and it looks pink and green when I plug it into input 3 or 4, it looks fine. What gives? Alternatively, the image might not show up at all when plugged into inputs 1 or 2, but works fine in 3 or 4. We've also seen some HDMI fiber cables work on inputs 1 and 2, but not the rest. Here's the scoop. On the ATEM Mini models with 4 inputs, input number 1 acts differently, and on the ATEM Mini Extreme models with 8 inputs, inputs numbers 1 and 2 operate differently. This first input supports a YUV color signal, while the other inputs support a YUV and RGB color signal. So if you're not providing it with an RGB signal, this is probably why. About a year ago, I reached out to Blackmagic and their official response was that this is the camera direct feature for low latency loop output when gaming. So off I went to the ATEM Mini Pro manual. Yep, I know, something that no one ever looks at, and sure enough, on page 94, there's a heading for setting the HDMI output source. And the first sentence says, the HDMI output can have various sources routed to it. For example, all video inputs, program, preview, plus camera 1 direct for a low latency loop output when gaming. This means that input 1 was specifically designed to be the lowest latency input when sending it to the output by design. This was so anyone who was trying to live stream themselves playing a video game could loop the output through the switcher without adding so much latency that the game was impossible to play. While Blackmagic gets brownie points for thinking about the gamers, I think they missed the mark because they created a feature that causes headaches for everyone else. That being said, now that I'm using the SDI switchers, this doesn't impact me anymore, but I can see why it would upset a whole lot of HDMI switcher owners. Here's the fix. You either switch it up and send those feeds into a different input, or you can run the video signal through a converter like the Decimator MDHX, which also has a scaler built in, and once the signal hits the ATEM, it should fix those pesky pink and green signal issues. I'm just the messenger, and this was what I found out by reaching out directly to the source. Most problems with the ATEM switchers can be avoided if you know what you're doing. I'm sure it's a headache if you didn't know to pay attention to my channel for tips like this, and that's why if you hit that like and subscribe button below, you'll see more videos just like this one to help you on your live stream journey. Until next time.